When I fell sick, I thought my children would come running. Instead, they told me, "We don't have time for you." That sentence broke something inside me. But what they didn't know is I still had time to make a decision they would never forget. My name is Dorothy, and I am 73 years old, a widow for nearly 2 decades. I've lived alone in the same little house my husband and I built from the ground up. It isn't grand 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen that always smells faintly of cinnamon, and a garden that has long been my sanctuary. For years, that house has carried laughter, tears, and the footsteps of my children running across the hardwood floors. I raised 3 children in that home. Every birthday cake baked, every scraped knee patched, every night spent worrying if I'd done enough. It all happened within those walls. My husband, God rest his soul, used to say, "Family is the only investment that never loses value." I believed him with all my heart. I poured everything I had, my youth, my energy, my dreams, into raising them well. But if there's one thing life teaches you, it's that the returns you expect aren't always the ones you get. My children grew up, as they should. They moved into lives of their own, each carving a path that seemed to pull them farther from me. My oldest son, Daniel, is a businessman, always on the go, phone glued to his ear, never enough time to sit for a cup of tea. My daughter, Elaine, is a mother of 3 herself. She lives 2 towns over, busy juggling her kids' school runs, dance classes, and her own career. Then there's my youngest, Paul, the dreamer, the one who once promised, "Don't worry, Mum, I'll always be close." But he left for the city and calls only when he remembers, which isn't often. Do I sound bitter? Perhaps. But understand, it isn't bitterness that drives me to speak today. It's something else, something deeper, a quiet ache that grows when you've given your all, and you sit in the silence of your own home, wondering if anyone remembers the sacrifices you made. Still, I never complained. I told myself, that was just the way of life. Children must fly, and mothers must learn to watch from the ground, until the day my body betrayed me. It began with something small, fatigue that clung to me no matter how much I rested, a cough that lingered too long. Then, one morning, I woke and couldn't quite catch my breath. My hands trembled as I reached for the phone. I told myself not to panic, that my children would come if I called. I dialed Daniel first. He answered briskly, his voice sharp with the rush of business. "Mum, I'm in a meeting. Can this wait?" I swallowed hard. "I don't feel well, son. I think I need someone to take me to the doctor." There was a pause, a sigh, and then, "I'll see if I can come by next week. Call Elaine in the meantime." Next week. My breath was shallow, my chest tight, but next week was all my son had to offer. So I called Elaine. Her voice was warmer but just as hurried. "Mom, the kids are all over the place right now. Soccer, ballet, you know how it is. Can you maybe call Paul? I just don't have time." Those words stung. I don't have time. Still, I tried once more. Paul answered after 4 rings, his tone distracted, music and chatter in the background. "Mum, I'm kind of in the middle of something. Can you figure it out yourself?" "I'll try to check in later." "Figure it out yourself." I set the phone down on the table, my hands trembling. In that moment, I felt something collapse inside me. Not my health, not my body, but my faith. The 3 children I had given everything to didn't have time for me, not even when I was sick, scared, and alone. That evening, I sat in my kitchen staring at the old clock on the wall. Each tick felt louder than the last, echoing the emptiness of the house. My husband's chair sat across from me, empty for 20 years. And now, though I had 3 grown children, it felt as though I had no one at all. Tears slipped down my cheeks, unbidden. I whispered to the silence, "After all I gave, not even one of them." That was the night I realized sometimes, the family you create can forget you, but life, in its quiet mercy, has a way of sending you someone unexpected, and that someone would arrive the very next day, with a gentle knock on my door. The knock came softly, almost tentative, as if the visitor wasn't sure they should disturb me. I dragged myself to the door, still weak from the night before, and opened it, to see my neighbor, Claire. Claire had moved into the house next door about 5 years ago. A widow herself, maybe in her early 50s, she carried the kind of warmth that made even her quiet presence feel comforting. She was holding a pot wrapped in a kitchen towel, steam rising gently from its lid. "Dorothy," she said softly, her eyes scanning my face. "You don't look well. I thought I'd bring you some chicken soup. It's my mother's recipe. Always does the trick when someone's under the weather." I wanted to protest, to insist I was fine. Pride is a heavy thing, especially when you've spent your whole life being the one who cared for others. But the truth was, I was tired of pretending I didn't need help, tired of being invisible to the ones who should have noticed. So I stepped aside, and Claire entered. She set the pot down, ladled steaming soup into a bowl, and slid it in front of me like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Eat," she said gently. "Then tell me what's really going on." For a moment, I sat there, spoon in hand, staring at her kindness. It felt foreign, not because I didn't recognize it, but because I hadn't received it in so long. My children had given me excuses, but this woman, a neighbor, not even family, was giving me her time. I ate, and the warmth of the broth spread through me, easing something more than just the ache in my chest. Over the next week, Claire checked in daily. She brought groceries, insisted on tidying up the kitchen when I was too weak to manage, and sometimes simply sat with me while I rested in my chair. She never pushed, never asked for more than I could give. She just was there. One afternoon, she found me sitting by the window, staring out at the garden I hadn't tended in weeks. The roses had wilted. The weeds had taken over. It looked as forgotten as I felt. "You know," she said, pulling on a pair of gloves she'd brought, "gardens don't need much to come back to life. Just a little care." She spent hours outside that day, pulling weeds, pruning branches, and by evening, the garden looked less like a graveyard of forgotten blooms and more like a place with hope. I watched her through the window, my chest tight with an emotion I hadn't felt in months, gratitude. But as Claire gave, my children remained absent. One evening, when I felt a bit stronger, I called Daniel again. I told him about the doctor's appointment Claire had taken me to. I thought maybe, just maybe, the mention of another person stepping in would stir something in him. Instead, he sounded annoyed. "Mum, you can't just let some stranger handle things for you. What if she's after something? People take advantage, you know. You should wait until I have time. I'll sort things out properly." Wait until he had time. As though my illness should stand in line behind his calendar. Elaine wasn't any better. When she finally picked up one of my calls, she sighed before I even spoke. "Mum, I told you I'm drowning here. Between the kids and work, I can't be running back and forth to your house. Don't make me feel guilty, all right?" Her words were sharper than she intended, I think, but they cut all the same. And Paul, he stopped answering altogether. Text messages went unread, voicemails unreturned. Once, by accident, I overheard him laugh on social media, his voice full of life. My heart ached at the sound, not because I begrudged his joy, but because I realized he had joy without me. It became clear then. My children didn't just lack the time, they lacked the willingness. Claire, on the other hand, never hesitated. If I coughed too hard, she knocked on the door. If I looked lonely, she sat and shared tea. She told me stories about her late husband, about her children who lived out of state, and somehow, in the sharing, we both felt less alone. One night, when she noticed the tears I tried to hide, she placed her hand over mine and said, "You deserve better, Dorothy. You deserve care, not excuses." Her words stayed with me. Deserve. It was a word I had never applied to myself. Mothers give. Wives give. I had always thought my worth was in what I provided, not in what I should receive. But Claire's steady kindness cracked something open inside me. The next morning, as I looked at my reflection in the mirror, pale, fragile, lines of age etched deep into my skin, I whispered to myself, "I deserve better than to be forgotten." And for the first time in years, I began to think not just of surviving my illness, but of what legacy I would leave behind when the time came. If someone had told me a year ago that the person who would stand by me most in my weakest days would be my neighbor, I would have laughed. Not because I didn't like Claire, but because I would have thought, surely my children would never let me down that way. Surely they would show up before anyone else. But life has a way of humbling us, stripping away illusions until all that's left is truth. And the truth was simple. My children had chosen distance, and Claire had chosen presence. It wasn't just the soup or the errands. It was the way she saw me. One evening, she noticed me staring at an old photo frame on the mantel. It was a family picture, my husband, myself, and the children when they were young, all gathered around the Christmas tree. Their little faces glowed with laughter, sticky with candy canes, their eyes full of trust in me. I must have looked sad, because Claire quietly asked, "Do you miss those days?" I swallowed hard. Every day. Back then I was needed. I mattered. She shook her head firmly. "You still matter, Dorothy, and don't ever believe otherwise." The words pierced me. No one had told me that in so long, not even my children. From that day on, Claire became my anchor. She would stop by with fresh bread from the bakery, or sit beside me in the garden, sipping tea as we watched the evening light fade. She listened, truly listened, as I spoke of my husband, my fears of aging, my loneliness. Where my children had hurried me off the phone, she lingered. But her kindness also sharpened the sting of my children's neglect. One Sunday, Elaine finally visited, children in tow. I had been looking forward to it, thinking maybe she had come out of genuine care. But as soon as she stepped inside, she wrinkled her nose and said, "Mum, this place looks gloomy. You really should consider selling the house and moving into something smaller." Smaller. To her, this wasn't the home where she took her first steps, where birthdays and holidays had been celebrated. To her, it was just a gloomy old house, inconvenient to maintain. I glanced at Claire then, who was quietly wiping down the counter. She caught my eye, and her soft, steady presence reminded me that love doesn't complain when it visits. It simply shows up. "Later," Elaine scolded me gently. "You really shouldn't depend on neighbors. Family should be taking care of family." The irony almost made me laugh. Family should be taking care of family yet. When I had called, she hadn't come. Still, I held my tongue. I wasn't ready for confrontation. Not yet. Paul made a rare appearance a week later. He breezed in, looking sharp in a new jacket, smelling faintly of expensive cologne. He hugged me quickly, distractedly, and then sat down with his phone in hand. "Mum, you should think about updating your will," he said casually, as if discussing the weather. "You know, just to make sure everything's sorted when the time comes. It avoids drama later." My stomach turned. He hadn't even asked how I was feeling. He hadn't brought a flower, a card, not even a loaf of bread. His only concern was the future of my possessions. I smiled faintly, masking my ache. "Don't worry, Paul. I've thought about it." And indeed, I had. After he left, Claire found me sitting quietly in the kitchen. She put her hand on my shoulder and said, "You don't have to say yes to their neglect, Dorothy. You don't have to reward it." Her words lingered with me long after she went home that night. I began to compare not in bitterness, but in clarity. Who had brought me comfort when I was weak? Claire. Who had taken me to the doctor, sat with me, revived my garden, and reminded me I still mattered? Claire. And who had told me, "Figure it out yourself"? Who had said, "I don't have time"? Who had looked at my house and seen nothing but a property to sell? My children. It was then, for the first time, that the thought crossed my mind. What if I left everything to the person who actually cared for me? The thought startled me. It felt rebellious, almost shameful, like a betrayal of my role as mother. But then, another truth rose up in me. Hadn't they betrayed me first? I had spent my whole life believing that blood was everything. But blood had abandoned me. Kindness had not. One evening, as we sat in the garden, I turned to Claire and asked quietly, "Why do you help me so much? You don't owe me anything." She looked surprised, almost hurt. "Because you're my friend." And because one day, I hope if I'm in your shoes, someone will do the same for me. Tears welled in my eyes. For the first time in months, I felt valued, not as a mother, not as a provider, but as a person. That night, as I lay in bed, I made a silent decision. If my children had no time for me while I was alive, they would have no claim to what I left behind when I was gone. It wasn't revenge, it was truth. And soon, I would put that truth into writing. The idea haunted me for days after it first crossed my mind. Every time my phone sat silent on the table, every time I saw Claire carrying groceries into my kitchen while my own children never even called, the thought returned stronger. Why should I leave them anything? At first, I argued with myself. A mother doesn't cut her children out. A mother forgives. Hadn't I told myself that all my life that love meant patience, that blood always outweighed pain? But then I remembered the sharpness of Daniel's voice. I'll see if I can come by next week. I remembered Elaine's sigh. Don't make me feel guilty, all right? I remembered Paul's dismissive tone. Figure it out yourself. And I thought of Claire, who had shown up with soup without even being asked, who had weeded my garden, carried my groceries, driven me to the doctor, who had sat beside me in silence, never once making me feel like a burden. It became clearer with each passing day. Blood might run through our veins, but care runs through our choices. One morning, I dressed carefully, put on my coat, and asked Claire to drive me into town. She thought it was a routine errand, but instead, I asked her to drop me at my lawyer's office. The waiting room smelled faintly of leather and old paper. My lawyer, Mr. Franklin, had handled my affairs since my husband's passing. A kind but practical man, he looked surprised when I told him what I wanted. You want to change your will entirely? He asked, adjusting his glasses. Yes. My voice trembled, but not with doubt, with conviction. May I ask why? I told him everything. The illness, the phone calls, the absence of care, the sting of being told they had no time for me. As I spoke, tears slipped down my cheeks, but I didn't stop. And then there's Claire, I said softly. She's not family, not by blood, but she has been here. She has cared. And I realized that is what matters. Mr. Franklin studied me for a long moment before nodding. It is your right to decide where your estate goes, Dorothy. And from what you've described, it sounds like you've thought this through. But are you prepared for the consequences? They may not take this kindly. A faint smile tugged at my lips. They had no time for me when I was alive. Why should I leave them time after I'm gone? He leaned back, folded his hands, and said, Very well, let's put it in writing. For the next hour, we went through the details. The house, the savings account my husband and I had built over years of hard work, the heirlooms passed down from my parents, all of it was to go to Claire. My children's names were erased from the inheritance, replaced with a single sentence that would one day echo like a gavel. I leave everything to the neighbor who cared for me. When Mr. Franklin slid the papers across the desk for me to sign, my hands shook, but not from hesitation, from release, from the weight of finally choosing truth over obligation. As the pen scratched across the page, I felt a strange peace wash over me. When it was done, Mr. Franklin looked at me with quiet respect. You've made a brave decision, Dorothy. Not brave, I whispered, just honest. On the way home, Claire asked if everything was all right. I smiled faintly and said, Yes, everything's finally in order. She didn't press. That was another thing about her. She respected silence as much as she respected words. I never told her what I had done. Part of me feared she would refuse such a gift, insist I keep it for my children. But more than that, I wanted the moment to come as a surprise, not just for her, but for my children as well. And oh, what a moment it would be. The weeks that followed were quiet, almost deceptively so. My health improved slightly, enough for me to get back to my garden, to walk to the corner store on good days. Claire remained by my side, a steady presence, while my children drifted in and out of my life like strangers. Daniel called once, asking about my savings account, not about my health. Elaine visited briefly but spent most of the time scolding her kids and glancing at her watch. Paul sent a single text. Hope you're better. Busy. Talk soon. Each interaction confirmed I had made the right choice. Still, I kept my secret close. I smiled when they hinted about someday, and nodded when they asked who would handle the house when I was gone. I let them believe they knew the future, because sometimes the sweetest justice is the justice no one sees coming. And in the quiet of my little house, I began to imagine the scene: a lawyer's office, my children sitting smug, expectant, Claire sitting humbly by my side, the lawyer clearing his throat and reading the line that would strip the smugness from their faces in an instant. I pictured their shock, their outrage, their disbelief, and I pictured myself, sitting silently in the corner, a small, satisfied smile on my face. For years, I had been the forgotten one. Soon, they would realize they had been the forgotten ones all along. It's funny how absence feels different once a decision is made. Before, when my children ignored me, I felt wounded, like a child left out of a game. After signing that will, I felt a quiet strength. Their absence no longer left me hollow, it left me certain. And then, just as suddenly as they had vanished from my life, they began to reappear. Daniel was the first. He showed up one Saturday morning, his suit jacket still on as though he had stopped by between appointments. He hugged me quickly, then scanned the living room with the eyes of a man assessing property. "You've kept the place up," he said, patting the arm of the sofa like it was an investment portfolio. "Must be worth a good bit by now. The neighborhood's really appreciated." I smiled faintly. "I wouldn't know. I don't plan on selling." He chuckled, the kind of laugh that carried no warmth. "Well, someday, when it passes to us, we'll figure it out. When it passes to us." The words rang in my ears like a bell tolling for their entitlement. I poured him tea, my hands steady, my face calm. Inside, I whispered, "You have no idea." A week later, Elaine arrived with her children. She barely greeted me before complaining. "Mum, this house is too much for you. You should move into assisted living. The kids hate coming here, no Wi-Fi, no space." Her daughter rolled her eyes. Her son groaned loudly, and Elaine turned to me with an exasperated sigh. "I mean, really, you can't expect us to keep coming out here. It's just not convenient." Convenient. That's what I had become, an inconvenience. Claire, who had stopped by earlier to bring me some muffins, overheard Elaine's words. She said nothing, just busied herself in the kitchen, but I saw the flicker of anger in her eyes. After Elaine left, muttering about how much she had to do, Claire set the muffins on the table and shook her head. "They don't see you, Dorothy." "Not really." Her voice carried sorrow, but also truth, and I clung to that truth, knowing what was coming. Paul was the last to reappear. He came late one evening, smelling faintly of beer, his tone syrupy with false affection. "Mum, you look great," he said, kissing my cheek before sprawling across the couch. "I've missed you. Work's been crazy, you know how it is. But hey, I was thinking, you ever sort out your will? Not that I'm rushing you or anything." He laughed as though it were a joke, but his eyes gleamed. "Just, you never know. It's smart to be prepared." Prepared. That's all I was to him, a vault waiting to be opened. I told him gently, "Don't worry, everything's already taken care of." And it was, just not the way he imagined. The weeks went on like this. Daniel dropping hints about the house, Elaine sighing about how I was too much work, Paul fishing for details about the estate. None of them came to sit with me when I was lonely. None of them asked about my heart, my fears, my dreams. But they noticed Claire. Oh, they noticed. One afternoon, when Daniel arrived unannounced, he found her in the garden, trimming back the roses. He frowned. "Why is she always here?" he asked, his voice sharp with suspicion. "She's a good friend," I replied simply. He snorted. "Friends don't just hang around unless they're getting something out of it. Be careful, Mom. People like that. They're opportunists." The irony nearly made me laugh. An opportunist, coming from the mouth of my son, who only appeared when inheritance was on his mind. Another time, Elaine saw Claire helping me carry in groceries. She leaned close and whispered, "Mum, don't be naive. She probably wants something. You shouldn't trust outsiders more than your own children. I looked into her eyes and said quietly, "Then you should have acted like children when I needed you." Her face flushed, and she changed the subject quickly. Paul, for his part, was bolder. He confronted Claire directly one evening as she was leaving. "Why are you always here? Don't you have your own life?" Claire, calm as ever, looked him in the eye and said, "Someone has to make sure your mother isn't alone." He sneered, muttered something under his breath, and stormed out. I sat there, watching the clash unfold, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel helpless. I felt vindicated. Each cruel remark, each mocking glance, each selfish question only reaffirmed the justice of my choice. They had no idea that the will was already sealed, their names erased. They thought they were circling prey, when in truth, they were circling an empty plate. One evening, as Claire and I sat together in the garden, I whispered to her, "Do you ever believe in fate?" She smiled. "Sometimes." I nodded. "Then maybe it's fate that you knocked on my door that day. You've been more family to me than my own blood." She squeezed my hand, her eyes kind. "And you've been family to me." In that moment, I knew without doubt I had made the right decision. But the sweetest part of fate was still to come, because one day, very soon, my children would gather, smug and expectant, in a lawyer's office, and I would sit quietly in the corner, watching as their world tilted. And when Mr. Franklin read the line, "I leave everything to the neighbor who cared for me," the storm they had brewed with their neglect would finally break. It was Claire who first suggested I call a family meeting, but it was my lawyer, Mr. Franklin, who gave me the idea that set everything in motion. "You know," he had said after I signed the new papers, "you don't have to wait until you're gone. A living will reading can save disputes later, and it lets you be present when things are made clear." Present. That word stayed with me. For once in my life, I wanted to be present when the truth came to light. I wanted to watch the masks slip from my children's faces, to see the moment they realized that neglect has consequences. So, with Mr. Franklin's help, I arranged it. Letters went out to my children, formal invitations to gather at his office for a matter regarding the estate. Daniel arrived first, punctual as always, his phone pressed to his ear, until the moment he stepped through the door. Elaine came next, children left at home, her heels clicking impatiently across the floor. Paul wandered in last, late as usual, his shirt half tucked, acting as though the world owed him an apology for starting without him. They exchanged polite greetings with Mr. Franklin, but when their eyes landed on Claire, seated quietly beside me, their expressions soured. "What's she doing here?" Daniel asked, his voice low but sharp. "She's my guest," I replied simply. Elaine rolled her eyes. "Mum, this is family business?" "Exactly," I said, folding my hands in my lap. "And she has been more family to me than anyone else in this room." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Mr. Franklin cleared his throat, opening a thick folder on the desk. "Shall we begin?" The children leaned forward expectantly, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. He began with the formalities, dates, legal references, acknowledgements of my sound mind. I watched as their faces shifted from boredom to barely concealed eagerness, waiting for the part they cared about. And then it came. "I, Dorothy Harris," Mr. Franklin read, his voice steady, "being of sound mind, do hereby declare my last will and testament. I leave all of my estate, including my home, my savings, and all personal belongings to the neighbor who cared for me in my time of need." Silence. A silence so thick it seemed to swallow the room. Then came the eruption. "What?" Daniel shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This has to be a mistake." Elaine's face went pale, then red. "Mum, what are you talking about? The neighbor. She doesn't deserve anything." Paul laughed, a sharp, incredulous sound. "This is insane. You can't be serious." I sat calmly, hands folded in my lap, my eyes fixed on them. Claire, beside me, shifted uncomfortably, her cheeks flushed. She hadn't known. She hadn't expected this. Mr. Franklin, unbothered by their outbursts, continued reading. This decision was made with full consideration and reflects my express wishes. My children have, by their own choices, distanced themselves from me. In my time of illness, they did not provide care, comfort, or presence. It was Claire who stepped forward, who tended to me, who reminded me of my worth. Therefore, she inherits everything. Each word landed like a hammer on stone. Daniel slammed his fist against the desk. "You manipulated her," he snapped at Claire. "Didn't you? You must have convinced her to do this." Claire's eyes widened in shock. What? I never asked for—" "Enough," I said, my voice calm but firm, cutting through the chaos. They all turned to look at me. For once, they were silent. "You say she manipulated me," I continued, my eyes fixed on Daniel. "But tell me, where were you when I called, begging for someone to take me to the doctor?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. I turned to Elaine. "You said you didn't have time. You told me not to make you feel guilty. Tell me, when did you last sit with me without checking your watch?" Her face crumpled, shame flickering for a moment before she masked it with anger. "And then, Paul, you told me to figure it out myself. And I did. I figured out who cared and who didn't. And now my will reflects that." Their mouths moved, but no words came. I leaned back in my chair, my voice steady. "You had no time for me while I was alive. Now I have nothing for you when I'm gone." The silence that followed was absolute. Claire touched my hand gently, whispering, "You didn't have to do this for me." "I didn't," I whispered back. "I did it for myself." Mr. Franklin closed the folder with finality. "That concludes the reading. The will is signed, witnessed, and sealed. There is no contest." The children sat in stunned silence, their faces pale, their entitlement shattered. For once, I was not the forgotten one. They were, and in that quiet, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. The silence after the will reading didn't last long. Daniel was the first to break it. He leaned across the desk, his voice rising. "This isn't final. I'll get a lawyer. We'll challenge it." Mr. Franklin didn't even look up from his papers. "You're welcome to waste your money, but the will is airtight. Every decision was documented, witnessed, and justified. There is no ground for contest." Daniel's face flushed an angry red. He turned on me, his eyes blazing. "How could you do this to your own son?" I met his gaze without flinching. "How could you leave your mother to suffer alone?" Elaine jumped in then, her voice sharp, almost hysterical. "This isn't fair. You can't just erase us like this. We're your children. Family means something." I stood slowly, my body weary but my resolve unshaken. Family means showing up when it matters. Family means bringing soup, sitting quietly, weeding a garden, holding a hand when it trembles. "Tell me which of you did that." Their silence was answer enough. Paul finally spoke, his tone mocking, but I saw the fear in his eyes. "So what? You're leaving everything to a stranger. You'd rather reward her than your own blood?" I took a deep breath, then said clearly, "Yes, because blood is not family when it turns its back. She was here. You weren't. End of story." The words seemed to hang in the air like a verdict. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. Elaine's lip trembled. Paul shook his head in disbelief. They looked like children again. Not grown adults, but children stripped of their favorite toy. Claire squeezed my hand under the table, her voice soft but steady. "You don't have to explain, Dorothy. You've said enough." But I wasn't finished. I looked at each of them, my voice calm but cutting. "Do you know what the worst part was? Not the loneliness, not the illness. It was hearing the words, 'We don't have time for you.' Those words broke something in me that no amount of inheritance could repair. And so, I repaired it myself, with ink, with paper, with truth." Elaine's eyes filled with tears. "Mum, please." I shook my head. "No, you had your chance. All of you did. And you chose yourselves." Paul muttered under his breath, "This is insane." But his voice lacked conviction. Daniel stormed out first, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. Elaine followed, her heels clicking furiously, her tears streaking her face. Paul lingered, his eyes darting between me and Claire, as though hoping I might change my mind at the last second. But when I said nothing, he scoffed and left without another word. And just like that, the room was quiet again. I sank back into my chair, suddenly exhausted. Claire slipped her arm around my shoulders. "You did it," she whispered. I closed my eyes and let out a long, shaky breath. "No," I said softly. I told the truth, finally. For years, I had been the one left behind, the one they didn't have time for. But that day, I watched as their entitlement crumbled, as their certainty turned to dust. And in that moment, I realized justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it whispers through signed papers and a steady voice. The days after the will reading were quiet. My phone, once silent from neglect, now rang with desperate calls. Daniel left messages dripping with anger and pleading. Elaine's voice cracked with guilt, though it was clear she was still thinking more of what she had lost than of me. Paul sent texts ranging from threats to apologies. I didn't answer, not one. Claire sat with me one evening on the porch, the sky painted gold with sunset. She asked gently, "Do you regret it?" I thought about that for a long moment. I thought about the look on Daniel's face when the words were read, about Elaine's tears, Paul's disbelief, about the years I had given, the sacrifices I had made, the silence I had endured. Finally, I shook my head. No, I regret that it had to come to this, but I don't regret telling the truth. She nodded, her hand resting on mine. You gave them chance after chance. They chose to throw it away. I looked out at the garden, the roses blooming again thanks to Claire's care. Once wilted, they now stood tall, vibrant, alive, much like me. For years, I had believed my worth depended on my children's love, that without their attention I was nothing. But life had shown me otherwise. My worth had been here all along, in the care I gave, in the love I had, and in the dignity I refused to surrender. I thought back to those words that had haunted me. "We don't have time for you." I smiled faintly. They were right, I said aloud. They didn't have time for me, but I had time to make sure my legacy went where it belonged. Claire tilted her head. "And where is that?" I squeezed her hand. "With the person who cared for me, with family not by blood, but by choice." The crickets began to sing as the sun dipped lower, the air cool and sweet. I felt peace settle over me like a blanket. One day, when I am truly gone, my children will remember that reading. They will remember the neighbor they mocked, the mother they ignored, and the inheritance they lost. Maybe it will sting enough to teach them something. Maybe it won't. That part is no longer mine to worry about. As for me, I have my garden, my quiet evenings, and the unexpected gift of a friend who became family, and that is more than enough. I leaned back, closing my eyes as the breeze rustled the roses, and whispered to myself the words I wished I had believed sooner. I mattered. I still matter, and I always will.